I do have a joy in being Native for all the hardships that I have faced because of it. This idea of overcoming colonialism and unlearning a lot of stereotypes and practices and just general attitudes towards me. It is my identity. It is a part of who I am. And this idea of that is I embrace it because I want to embrace all of myself.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this American Inspiration event presented by American Ancestors, New England Historic Genealogical Society, and Boston Public Library, ably produced by GBH Forum Network. I'm Margaret Talcott, Director of Literary Programs at American Ancestors NEHGS and a producer of the series. All of us behind the scenes are delighted you're with us tonight in the land of history, looking at our country today and yesterday, the experience of Native Americans, particularly women. For more about this evening, over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Margaret. And from the Boston Public Library, welcome. I'm Kristen Motti, a programs librarian here at the Central Library. We're thrilled to be here to partner on tonight's talk with authors Leah Myers and Caitlin B. Curtis. Now I have the honor of telling you just a little bit about our featured author this evening. Leah Myers, author of Thinning Blood, received an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of New Orleans, where she won the Samuel Mockbee Award for Nonfiction 2 years in a row. She now lives in Alabama with roots in Georgia, Arizona, and Washington State. We'll meet Leah in just a moment. Now to introduce tonight's moderator, Margaret, back over to you.
Thanks, Kristen. Caitlin B. Curtis is an author, essayist, and poet's storyteller. As an enrolled citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, she writes on the intersections of spirituality and identity. Her latest book is Living Resistance, an Indigenous vision for seeking wholeness every day. Her work has been featured on CBS and in USA Today. Ms. Curtis will join us in a bit. For starters, though, Leah, welcome to you. As I have said to you many times backstage, I loved every turn of your book, from the sharing of stories and myths to your recapping of American history to the many memoir components, which is a special passion for my audience. We really look forward to hearing more about Thinning Blood, and I know you have some readings in store for us. So a hearty welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you all for having me. And I did want to start everything off with a bit of reading for the introduction, which is titled A Lineage. No one taught me to be Native American. My mother taught me that I was, but she did not have the context for what that heritage meant. My grandmother mentioned it very little, even though it was visible in her features. Yet from my earliest memories, being Native has always been an integral part of my identity. Even though I was raised far from my tribe, far from any tribe, I heard the drumbeat of our traditions in my heart. My name is Leah Myers. I am the last member of the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe in my family line. My family has always called me the record keeper. I collect the stories of those who came before me, of all my family members. I have suitcases and shoeboxes full of photos and notebooks full of stories. I aim to make memories tangible, physical, so that they are harder to forget. In being the record keeper, I must construct parts of history from fact fragments. To my knowledge, I am the only woman in this lineage who's connected with her totem, also called one spirit animal, on her own. Mine is Raven. No one knew my great-grandmother Lillian's animal, but after hearing stories of her strength and protective nature, it is clear to me that she was Bear. Vivian, my granny, was raised to think our stories make us look foolish or simple. Even though she reconnected with the traditions later in life, some parts were too deep-rooted to let go. She was in a constant swim upriver, fighting against the world around her. She was Salmon, the symbol of sacrifice and determination. Christy, my mom, never had the opportunity to think of her own connection to our culture. We have discussed spirit animals often, and I suggested Hummingbird, the symbol of spirituality, love, and joy. It clicked in her soul. I have learned and modified the legends for each of these spirits and tell them so that they reflect the women of my life even more. My family history is shrouded enough, lost enough, that it is myth itself and blends easily with the legends of my people to create a seamless new record for the world. I don't want other Native Americans to go without, like my family has for so long. I want to give my generation a voice. I was born to tell my story and the story of my people, to make everyone aware that we exist still, that we breathe still. Totem poles are used to represent stories or places, and in my case, the totem pole I have created in my mind represents my family. I picture this carved monument standing alone in a clearing within the Washington rainforest. Its painted faces, though worn in places, show bear, salmon, hummingbird, and perched at the top, raven. I'm here to carve that same totem pole into the minds of others, so we will not be forgotten when we are gone. Thank you. And I would like to now welcome Caitlin up to join me.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to say I was so honored to read this beautiful book. And as an Indigenous author, it just means a lot to me to read books by other Indigenous women, especially talking about these really difficult and beautiful things. And I think that you wrote with such honesty, and I really, really appreciated that because it just reminded me of why I write and why it matters that we tell our stories. You know, we are storytellers in our cultures. And so first, I just want to say thank you, Miigwech. Thank you for writing your stories and for being that record keeper, right? And giving others the courage to tell their own stories. So I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reading them.
Yeah. So I am going to read bits and pieces from the book. I have, of course, so many questions, but I've narrowed it down to a few. And you just read from a piece that I wanted to touch on as well, which is this word in the introduction that you write about, that line, no one taught me to be Native American. And I really related to that a lot too. You said, my mother taught me that I was, but she did not have the context for what that heritage meant. And I often say the same thing for my story, that I knew I was Potawatomi. I knew that, like, it was in my head, but it didn't drop into my heart, into my body, what that meant and how it would mold my life. And so I think a lot of Indigenous people honestly relate to that. And I think that it's hard for people who are not Native to try to explain how this isn't our fault. But it is something that has happened as colonization has continued to happen over the generations, the trauma that has unfolded. So how can we help people understand that this disconnect, or this thing that has happened to a lot of us, how can we sort of frame that for people to understand that this is the way it is in a lot of families, and a lot of us are finding our way back, or making sense of our stories, or finally telling them in different ways. I guess you did it through this book, but how else can we kind of make that clear to people? What do you think?
I think that whenever approaching it, because I talk about that a lot in the bear section of my book, it's a lot about this idea of disconnect.
Yeah.
And I framed it, and this is how I frame it when I do speak on it, is this idea of it was done out of safety. It was done to protect the people around her. That was the safest option. And I think kind of reminding people that it wasn't just a matter of identity or choice. It was a matter of safety and providing for the family.
Yes.
There were people that wouldn't sell to Native people. Even in my grandmother's generation, they had to hide that they were half Native because there were people that wouldn't hire them, that wouldn't house them, that wouldn't sell to them because of that identity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important. And so many of our grandparents, great-grandparents lived through the boarding school era. And that's like a piece of our history we just don't talk about. So there's so many gaping holes in US history that make it really hard for us to kind of tell our histories and make sense of some of these things. And the heritage of colonization even. So it's difficult, right? There's so much unlearning that we need to do even as a nation to have these conversations.
Exactly. I think people have to be prepared for some very hard conversations. And I think that, just for me, I tend to pull from parts like, in talking about boarding schools, I pull from things that people wrote in yearbooks there. One of the lines was, "Please remember me when I'm in the grave." Like that was something that a child wrote scared. And so I think that always framing it in this, like, that was, it's not going to be an easy conversation, but it's one we have to keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely. I love asking this question to other authors because I'm always just curious. What have you learned about yourself in the process of releasing the book, writing it, because we learn so much about ourselves once a book comes out. And I don't know, it's just really interesting how our books are such a huge part of our life, and they affect us. So I just wonder, what have you learned about yourself? What have you noticed?
I think in the writing of the book, I definitely went on a journey of realizing I am a storyteller. I've always felt like one, but it was very informal. And then as the book kind of came together, I was like, no, this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I've always wanted to do. So that was in the writing of it. And then in the releasing of it, I think realizing that even though I wrote the book for me, I'm very happy to be that representation for other people. I am not somebody that is really always comfortable in the spotlight or like being the center. But I've seen reviews from people talking about how they are in the same position I am and how this book was let them know they aren't alone. And that's so deeply impactful. That's such a big thing. And I'm happy to be that. It's funny to think of myself that way sometimes, but I'm very happy that I can be.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, it is. It's a kind of difficult, wonderful honor and sometimes pressure to hold all of that. Even to be a storyteller is all of that, but it is so beautiful when we step into it and trust that journey. And like you said, you have messages and readers show up and say, this changed me, or now I know I'm not alone. And that's such a gift, right? And it keeps us going. So I love that. Okay, I want to read from page 73 in the book. I thought this was really powerful. One of these moments where I was just like sitting with it because you were being so like raw and honest. And it's a lot of thoughts I've had, and I know it's a lot of thoughts other Indigenous people have had. So you say, I didn't want to fail at being Native. Being Native to me then meant not only having the experience of all these cultural things, but also being decent at them. I wanted to feel a peace in myself that cultural things brought me, but I had never felt so out of my depth. Failure felt imminent. Because I couldn't fail at something I never had the chance to try. So the excuses continued to pour from me, sweetly apologetic, to hide the stench of the rotting fear that created them. I have had so many conversations with other people in varying degrees of what you just wrote, of feeling that like not enoughness and that I didn't try hard enough, and all of these things. And it was such raw, beautiful writing, and I really appreciated it. And I wonder if we can just talk about this kind of imposter syndrome you write about, this need to prove ourselves in our cultures, especially if we didn't grow up knowing necessarily the stories or the language, or, they're just Indigenous people with varying degrees of connection, right? So I don't know, how do we deal with this? And how do we deal with it then in front of an audience? Maybe is also a layer to that, which I know that you're experiencing now.
Yes, no, I think that the imposter syndrome it's hard. And I think it comes from some of, I think every culture has it. I don't think there's a single person that doesn't suffer from that. But I think that at least in my experience, it seemed like all the stereotypes about Indigenous people were that they are inherently good at the things that they are supposed to be good at. And, everybody knows inherently how to do fishing or hunting in a traditional way. And so that adds that layer of this sort of stereotypical expectation. And if that's the only representation you've had, that that's scary.
Wow.
And I think dealing with it is also a struggle. I think that looks different for everybody. For me, it came through writing. I wrote something that I thought was pretty commonplace knowledge, something that I was like, oh, everybody's going to know this, but I'm framing it in a certain way. And people didn't, it was not something anyone outside of Native culture really knew. And so I realized like, oh, I know more than I thought. And I kind of kept digging to see what else that I thought was commonplace wasn't.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. And that's really interesting. Yeah, that the things that you assumed aren't always for everybody. And I always joke, my son really wants to learn to bead, and I am like the most impatient, horrible crafter. I mean, I can write books. I will write as many as I need to, but don't ask me to like work with my hands at a craft. And so I'm always like, I can't do it. I can't do it. But is that true? Can we not do it? Or, like, I don't know, but we're not automatic. And that's so true. The stereotypes that get built into these things, like we're automatically wise and we love camping.
Yeah.
And I have like Native friends that are like, I hate camping. And it's good for people to recognize that these are, there's so many tribes just in Turtle Island in the United States alone. And we do not all have even the same cultures of what we do, what our crafts are, what our sports are, and so it helps to read books like yours for people to get that, like, oh, I can break down this stereotype and not just assume these things, and hopefully then it helps us not feel so much pressure all the time to
Absolutely.
show up.
I think I've talked to a lot of people that have that varying imposter syndrome, and that like different levels. And it's like, I make sure to remind them all, because I wanted somebody to remind me that like the idea of Native enough, it's like, you are like, there's no limit for that. If you are culturally connected to it in any capacity, then you did it. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to come to terms with that.
It is. And I think we're in a culture too that really like rewards the trauma stories, but not the like beautiful healing stories sometimes, especially on social media. So dealing with that too is hard, that we're so fixated on our trauma, when sometimes we just want to like be people, and we just want to be normal people, but also be healing and be like confident in who we are, like I find that to be hard as well. I don't know. It's difficult to hold all of that. Speaking of, great stereotypes, let's talk about Pocahontas.
Yeah.
And being Native women and Native girls. Oh my gosh. I loved that movie growing up. And I've written about it in my book Native. And so I'm glad you wrote about it. And you wrote about it with, again, such honesty and like your own struggles of like, we still love some of the songs. Some of the songs are great. And we still would watch parts of the movie, but it's like tainted and it hurts. It's like, it hurts, but it is beautiful, but is it? And there's just so much emotion. So I wanted to read this little snippet from this whole section, this whole chapter. When I was a kid, I was convinced that my hair was supposed to flow in the wind like Pocahontas does in the movie while she is standing on the cliff when she first appears on screen. Me too. We were both Native, so it had to be true. She was the only Native woman I knew who had long hair like mine. Both Mom and Granny kept theirs in pixie cuts and have done so all my life. Even watching it as an adult, part of my mind still aches with hope that I will one day have hair that is well behaved, even in a windstorm. The scene makes me give in to the urge to pull my hair into a messy bun. I need it out of the way so I can forget that I am not the perfect Native and watch Disney's version of this construct glide across the screen. When Pocahontas begins to talk to her raccoon and hummingbird friend, I remember my tenacious attempts at talking to and befriending animals. That part made me laugh so hard because I did the same thing. And to trees, like all trees.
Yeah.
Mother, well, let's talk to them. I still talk to them, but still, when you're little, it's very magical. Disney told me it was my blood given right, and why would they ever lie? Oh man, it was so good. It was so like I was laughing, but also like almost crying because it's so painful, but it's so true. And and we can sort of laugh about it now. And I mean, I had a Pocahontas Barbie, and her long hair was like my thing. I just loved her hair, and I wanted to wear my hair in a long braid, like it, and
Yeah.
you just create this out of this construct, you create your identity. And I don't know, she just meant so much to me. And now it's hard for me. I have 2 kids, and I've never been able to bring myself to let them watch the movie, because right from the beginning I was trying to explain colonization to them, and then I was like, I just can't do this. I don't know if we can do this. So I turned it off. And so I'm constantly feeling on guard for them, but also feeling this nostalgia for this particular film. So I just really appreciated how you wrote about it. So how do we hold that liminal space, that tension of these things we grew up with and we hate them, but we love them? How do we hold all of that?
I think with the understanding that like there is this objective appreciation for the nostalgia of it and for the beauty of it. Like they, that movie had so much money poured into it and so much time and craft. It is a gorgeous movie, like as far as the art of it and the music of it. Thematically, it's very hard. Like I have a lot of problems with the concepts, of course, it's what I wrote about. But I think having, being able to separate and sort of like understand, I'll never be able to fully enjoy just sitting and watching that movie again.
Yeah.
There's just, it's, I hurt too much for my younger self, I think. But I can appreciate that it is a gorgeous movie, and I do like, I have 2 of the songs on my Spotify because they're great songs and they're very fun.
Yeah. They are fun. Disney knows what it's doing. I mean, they always know how to get us. It's great. I don't have the Barbie anymore. I wish I kind of did, like one of those things that I held on to, but okay. What was the most difficult part of framing this book? Was there any time in the writing process that you were like, this is so hard, or it just felt stuck, or you're trying to get through it?
I think the most difficult part was probably touching on some of what we talked about, like that really letting myself be honest and vulnerable.
Yeah.
It'd be so much easier to sort of to just say instead of show how much I was afraid of being bad at being Native, how much I was afraid of doing these things and failing. It would be so much easier to skip over how excluded I've felt from certain communities and just say it and not show it. But that wouldn't be honest. And so I had to sit and let myself really be honest in that. So that would probably be the hardest personal part. And then the research, of course, I had to take steps away from that sometimes.
I bet. Yeah.
So
that's a lot, and emotionally heavy to, these, writing about these things isn't, it's not easy, like I had a lot of good therapy when I wrote my book Native, and I needed it because it was exhausting. Like it was really exhausting, but I needed to do it, and I don't know, sometimes there are stories that we have to tell and it's really hard to tell them, but they're really powerful because of it,
absolutely.
Yeah. Another question that kind of mirrors that is, what was your favorite part of framing the book this way? Or do you have a favorite part in the writing process that you just love?
I loved being able to write the myths, because they are, those are general stories that belong to, I know, like a lot of different tribes. Like they, it's not a lot of the stateless tribes have that, but I got to tell them in a personalized way. Because I'm the storyteller, and that's why I say like it's a legend. It's not the legend. It's just a version of it. And I think that was my favorite because I was able to tie in so much of what my family representation was, but also the actual tribal myth. I never strayed too far from the core of those, and it was really fun.
Oh, that's so fun. I love that you did that. And I'm sure it'll always be really special to your family that they have that, and they have it framed in your words and the way that you tell it, which is really, that's a gift of being an author, is that our words are sort of cemented in time, for better or for worse. But it's really a gift for family and friends to have that from us. So I love that. You have a chapter that I thought was really powerful. You kind of wrote this 7 generations letter. And for people who don't, first, can we start with, can you kind of describe what the 7 generations means, and to Indigenous people, to you personally, and then I'll ask the question. I think that's helpful.
Okay. So 7 generations in the tribes that use it is this policy of looking to the future 7 generations ahead, and whatever you're doing today and in your time is meant to create a better world or environment for 7 generations into the future. So, it's for me personally, it was often asked when I was going back to school, that was part of, or being part of higher education, it was asked, how does this, how are you helping the 7 generation? And so I it was constantly brought to my mind. And I realized that I'm writing, I'm recording stories, I'm learning these things and these skills to be able to preserve my family's history and my tribe's history.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way you write the letter is so honest. Again, I keep saying you're so honest, but it was a really honest telling of so many of your own thoughts and emotions, right? And you're writing to these people, or this idea, people, we can't picture what they look like, or we can't it is this idea, but it's also deeply embodied. So it's a strange thing to hold, and I think that it is so important to be sort of this record keeper now for future generations. And I wonder if you could just share with people listening, how can they sort of live into that in their own way? Not being Indigenous, but we all have to care about this. It's a way of, we're all sort of holding a vision for the future Earth, for whoever's coming down the line. How can they hold sort of a reverence and care for that?
I think just keeping it in mind will make people more more aware of the things, the choices that they make.
Yeah.
And that could be any number of things. There's a million ways to prepare for the future. If you are a person that preserves stories, or the written word or the family history is important to you, recording that so that it's not lost, because I think people often forget how easy it is for stories to vanish. And so making sure that they don't is a big part of that. But for other people, if you are, I think again about my tribe, they've created businesses and clinics and all of these things to help better the community at large. And that does help the 7 generations.
Yeah.
So thinking of a way to set up something now that will either help the community grow and thrive, or preserve something for the community later on.
Yeah. And it kind of turns us from the Western individualistic mindset of our life is just ours and then it's over, to thinking about how we can share the life we have now with people we don't know yet, or the world that we haven't encountered yet. And I think that helps people get out of it helps them be a little more communal, maybe. I think that's a gift. That's a gift that we can have.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is one I'm excited to ask you as a writer. What does your writing practice look like? What kind of writer are you? Are you really strict with the way you write? Are you not at all? It's always fun to hear about a daily practice, or however that shows up for you.
Yeah, I think that I am not very strict. I'm trying to get, I've always wanted to be, but I'm not going to listen to my own deadlines. Sometimes, I am very good about writing the theme that is important to me.
Yeah.
So I don't, some people go by word count or page count, and I tend to go by theme. I will write on a subject until I feel that I've at least gotten most of my ideas down. It might not be polished, but then I can go back and edit and add. And I think that's really important, is this, because that's what that's what will drive me. Is I'm a project-based writer. I want to write, about this subject or thing, or I want to connect these two dots. How do and get to that point. So I less about page count and a lot more about like outlines. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna cover this whole outline point until I'm done today.
Right. Yeah, I think I do a similar thing. And it's such a like when you're a storyteller, it's like so many puzzle pieces, because you have to figure out what chapter should this story go in, or where should this go, or where does this fit? Like you're saying, like you're trying to connect these dots that no one else knows exists. It only exists in your head. So you're like trying to make sense of these things, and in a way that the reader will get what you're doing. And that's so challenging, but wonderful.
Exactly. It's a puzzle and you don't have all the pieces yet, and they're being made in real time. And for me, I don't think of stories very linearly. I don't. And so I jump around quite a lot because I'm just going by thematics. And then it's like, oh, this is actually like 3 different essays or 3 different stories that I'm writing, but I wrote them all together.
Oh, let's talk about that more, because this is really important for people to kind of understand this idea of cyclical writing that's not linear. Because when they think of your totem, they may be thinking this is linear, like it's like stacked, and it's like this is how it goes, it's generational. So how would you kind of help people to not think that way and to understand stories in a different way?
I think that it's this idea of it is generational, but it's a portrait. It's not a timeline. It's not a chronological line. It is just, these are the people that exist, and how, and the stories that surround them, and also for me, it's themes. That's why the book is broken into sections. There's the theme of sort of erasure, or colonial pressure, the theme of not belonging, the theme of the sort of like imposter syndrome or false identity, and then the theme of like finding yourself. And so, it's not storylines, it's circles that sort of like overlap and coexist.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I'll ask one more question from my questions, and then we'll move on to some of the ones that were asked ahead of time and a few of the live questions as well. So one more just from me is, how can non-native folks be better listeners in the time we're living in? I just think it's always helpful to pose this question for people listening, because I think people want to be better and they want to do better. So what are some thoughts you have on that?
I think that the first is listening. I think that that's a hard, because everybody wants to be an active participant, and listening doesn't feel active, but it is, and it's a very important thing. So that would be the first step, and then the other is, it seems so simple, but it hasn't been in the past, and that is just believing Native people when it comes to, if they've told you about a practice or something, or a cultural thing. I don't sort of like frame it. I don't know how many times I've been told that I'm lying about being Native. It's pretty common though. It's more than I can count on one hand, probably more than I can count on 2. And so like, I think for people that want to do better, is that even though something might not fit your original impression or your idea of something, listening through that sort of defense moment and letting and kind of taking in this idea that somebody has presented to you.
Yes. Which again, like cycles us back to stereotypes and unlearning and history. Like it's
Absolutely.
all connected. It's all connected, and we're constantly reiterating it, through our stories, through our speaking events and our Q&As. Yes, wonderful. Okay, let's move to some of the audience questions. So these were a few that were asked ahead, and I have some that are coming in. Do you believe that your search for identity would apply to others who do not yet know their full ethnic genealogy, or some thoughts on that in general?
I think so. I think that I think everybody's search for identity is different. Identity is what is important to you. Some people, being Native was always very important to me. That is something that has always been true. And for people that want to sort of form their identity, I think that if a cultural connection is not immediate, that's okay. There's other things to form identity around. And if you find those cultural connections later, they can be those missing puzzle pieces.
Yeah, that's great. What do you see the future holding for Native Americans in the US?
I hope that the future holds a strong embrace of culture, and this renaissance or resurgence, which has been happening in some areas, which is wonderful to see, and bringing back certain practices that, faded away. For my tribe, for example, the canoe journey, there's an annual canoe journey along the Washington coast, from and to various different places, and that's really important. That's a very emblematic and iconic moment for me, and I hope that everybody continues to embrace that, and that continues to happen year to year, and they prioritize that, and that other tribes do the same. The sort of cultural embrace is very important, I think, and will help preserve our culture for longer.
Yeah. And again, that celebration of not just telling the truth about our trauma and history, but then celebrating the beautiful parts of our cultures. I mean, we have, I don't know, just so many wonderful things that we do just seasonally in our tribes. There's so many different things that are just a part of who we are that are such a gift, and I love being able to share that with other people. It's not it's not like we don't want to share it, and we want to be able to tell those stories. So I really love that. Do you believe that the quantum requirement will someday be updated?
I hope so. I know that when I was doing research for the book, they said that the discussions around that wouldn't happen for a few decades. And so I hope that is not, that comes sooner rather than later, or that this idea of quantum being an enrollment requirement is sort of reevaluated entirely. And I don't know what the other approach would be. There's plenty of tribes that have plenty of different ways, but I think that to deny someone cultural identity and this idea of access to that cultural identity based on what generation they are is a little troubling.
Yeah. And I know a lot of different tribes who have different rules around all of this. Some are some do take the time to reevaluate, or they rewrite their bylaws or their constitution. It is political. We have these political aspects to our tribes, that I don't know that people understand always that.
Right. It's not just a group of people making it. Tribes exist as a nation. It is a government, and they have to make those decisions, and there is a process.
Right.
And I just hope that that they are able to keep that in mind and reevaluate, and do what's best for the community.
Yeah. This was an interesting question. Do you believe museums play a role in the preservation of Indigenous cultures, or do you distinguish between museums and Indigenous art in general?
I believe that museums can be done in an ethical way. I believe that is a thing that could happen. I know that most of the practices would have to be reevaluated, because a lot of the artifacts that museums currently have, especially larger museums, are stolen, or were taken from graves. And that's sort of the problem for me, is this idea of these artifacts that people have requested back aren't being returned. But I do think that museums can exist in an ethical way, and on this idea of a rotating, people loaning things out for display and having them back after a certain number of years, if a tribe creates, certain cultures create a museum to house their cultural artifacts, that's different from a different culture owning it.
Right. Owning it, especially that idea.
And so I think that, yeah, I think there is a way for museums to play a part and for so that people can understand cultures that maybe aren't near them. But I think that the entire process would have to be reevaluated for it to be an ethical thing right now.
Mhm. Yeah. So a lot of the folks here are from these different genealogy groups. And so they have so many awesome questions. We can't get to all of them tonight. But I thought this one was interesting and would love to hear your thoughts. Someone asked, what would you like me to tell our genealogy group about preserving family history?
I think the best thing that anybody should have, but especially genealogy groups, is in the name of preservation, writing down stories. I touched on that a little bit, but even stories that don't sound important will have important people in them. And even stories that maybe have 5 or 6 different versions, then you at least know what people believed or thought and how that, and that's how they approach the world. There are so many stories that I no longer have access to because entire generations are gone. And it happened before anybody thought to get the stories and write them down or record them in some way. So that would be the biggest advice I have, is just making sure that those stories are preserved, that any photos are taken care of. If they're digital, back them up on a second thing. Just having this record that, even if it doesn't feel like important stuff now, may be important for you later or for your next generations.
Yeah. Can you discuss how you researched your history, ancestors, what resources were available to you, where were they located, etc.? So more about your process.
Yeah, so I started with my immediate family and sort of relying on their memory to get names or times and places. And then going a little bit further, I went into tribal history and looked into, asked people, cultural coordinators within the tribe about certain events to make sure that I had dates right and reasons right, and that everything I was saying was correct. So immediate family and tribe cultural coordinators were a big part. Another was just general research, just searching for either news articles or verifying that a place did exist where people thought it did. Because, for example, my grandmother moved houses when she was very young, and my great grandmother and her husband moved into a house and built onto it, and I had to kind of verify where they were before that, because I knew of that house in Washington, but I didn't know where they were before that. And so I started gathering these photos that you're seeing now. I wanted so that I could have faces to put with names, reached out to immediate family.
Such a process. Oh my goodness. Just like hearing you talk about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so so much work. So I just respect you so much for it. 'Cause it's a lot. It's a lot to trace these lines and try to, see where they overlap or where they don't overlap. And it's just I think that's inspiring for a lot of people who care about this stuff and are trying to figure out how to do it for themselves, This was a really interesting question. Do you think your feeling part of depends on where you, okay, just a second. Do you think your feeling part of someone depends on where you grew up or who you grew up with, or both? So feeling part of somebody, do you think that depends on where you grew up and who you grew up around?
I think it can. I think that can affect people. For me personally, I think that my mom likes to joke that carrying, that the deep Indigenous connection skipped generations, because she now cares about it and holds it in very high regard. But when I was a kid, she had no, that wasn't it was just sort of a fact and wasn't a connection. But I burst into tears when a teacher used the phrase you're being a bunch of wild Indians. When I was in class, I just burst in tears, and that teacher didn't know better. That wasn't, it was of the time, that was not a bad phrase. But it was something that I held so true. So I think that this idea of being Native or being Indigenous was always a part of who I was. But that lack of connection meant that I only had a vague idea, so I think it did affect the way that I connected with it.
Yeah. Let's see. I loved this question. I would like to know, in the future, might you write books for children or middle school range? That's the first question.
Okay.
Have you thought?
I'm not opposed to it. That's one of those things that I think that I would have to very much think about, because I think my language tends to just be more adult in the way that I write is very plain. And I don't think about having to pull back, but I would never be opposed to writing for that. I think that would be a very fun undertaking.
Yeah.
It would just be something that it would have to be a reframing of how I currently write.
Yeah. My first children's book is coming out this fall, and it was so much fun because it's like engaging your curious childlike side, but you have to be much more sort of magical in the way you write, and it can't just be like, here's how it is, guys, So yeah, it's different, but I look forward to that if you ever decide to. Oh, and then this is another one. Do you have an age recommendation for how old a youth should be to read this book?
I think that it will largely depend on, how that child, if a youth would be raised. I think that my book is rated as an adult because of a lot of themes that are in it. I don't pull punches. I don't hold back on things that have happened. And that includes, missing and murdered Indigenous women. It includes a lot of talks about race and things that I've gone through. So I think that older teenagers could, if their parents are aware of the content of the book. I think, I would very much strongly recommend that any parent that did want their kids to read it, and when I say kids, I do mean probably 16 would be the youngest. I would still say the parent should probably read that first and make sure that they are okay, having conversations with their children about it, because there's going to be things that are hard to grapple with.
Yeah. Let's see. There's a few more here. Trying to get to. I just started reading the book and I love it so far. I'm wondering how you identify with the other facets of your identity, Jewish, white roots, if you identify with them as strongly or if it's different. How do you hold all the things?
That's a very fun question. I think for me, the Jewish part of my identity is something that I know is there, and I know, and I hold it in regard, but I hold it in regard to the person, Louis Kardonsky, who had that, that was his identity. And it is not a part of how I would identify, because I don't face the same sort of cultural obstacles that somebody that does identify as Jewish would. But as far as the other parts, I grew up in the South. My dad is born and raised in Georgia. His mother was also born and raised in Georgia. And I very much identify with the Southern roots. That is a big part of my identity. I was talking to somebody recently about this idea of traditional food and how at the same time, sort of side by side in my mind, traditional food is both traditional native food and the idea of like cured salmon and clams, and traditional like New Year's Eve meals,
Yes,
of collard greens and black eyed peas. Those are both traditional to me, and so those get held side by side.
I love that. Especially like food is just like one of the best ways to talk about this merging, the overlaps in our identity and how we understand who we are. And it's like we go straight to food. It's the perfect way to kind of understand that. So I love that. Let's see. So we have about 4 more minutes on this portion of our time together. You seem to have a sense of joy in being Native. Could you say more about that?
Absolutely. I do have a joy in being Native. I for all the hardships that I have faced because of it, this idea of like, overcoming colonialism and unlearning a lot of stereotypes and practices and just general attitudes towards me. It is my identity. It is a part of who I am. And this idea of that is, I embrace it because I want to embrace all of myself. I want to, I am learning every day to approach myself with love and kindness, and the Native, being part Native or having this Indigenous identity is a huge part of that, and part that I have never struggled with. That's always been a comfort to me.
I love that. Let's see. One more that kind of, I think, just pulls us back around to blood quantum and some of these ideas. So this is a thought on this. It's strange to me that blood quantum is used by some nations as a way to ID Indigenous people. As I understand this, it's based on whether an ancestor is in the rolls or not, when rolls were made by European settlers to determine who they were responsible for per treaties. We have taken on what they started in completing it for them, thus reducing our numbers and impoverishing our cultures. I would like to know your thoughts on this, since you're experiencing this directly and personally.
Absolutely. I've written a little bit more about blood quantum. I wrote an article for The Atlantic, sort of addressing this. I don't like blood quantum. I think that I understand why it's this idea of preservation, and it's a split. There's people that believe that preserving culture exactly the way that it is how you preserve something, but that inevitably eats away as generations go on. And then there's this idea of preserving something for as long as you can, which is what I think we should strive for, but does sometimes get lost. So I would like to see blood quantum replaced with some other method of enrollment. I think that it's, I think that having that can be a detriment in communities. Like I said, I don't know what the solution is, and that's a whole governmental discussion.
Yeah.
But I know that it was a quarter when I was born, and in 1994 it became 1/8. So there was a time when a year of my life, not that I know it, but that I wasn't Native. I wasn't a tribal citizen.
Right.
And so I think that it's a very messy, complicated, controversial subject. But I think that there's a better way to do enrollment outside of blood quantum.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're gonna move on from the Q&A portion. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions, and thank you so much for answering them so wonderfully and taking the time to do that with everybody and with me. I'm so grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Caitlin, very much. Thank you both. You've offered us remarkable insight into history's gaping holes and also the controversies. It's all out there for research, and we're very grateful that you're surfacing all of this. As we do for all our authors in the American Inspiration series, we've asked Ms. Myers to read from her book, A Last Time. Leah, over to you.
Thank you so much. I am going to read A Legend of Raven Stealing the Sunlight. I think that will close this all out very wonderfully. So, Raven has many legends among the Salish people. This is the beginning. In the original legend, Raven is a man. In my version, Raven is a woman. In the beginning, there is darkness. The trees are there, the water is there, the light is not. Raven, like the other creatures of the world, pays this no mind until she sees light for the first time. It is a glimmer from the inside of a Salish man's cabin, the only light the world has ever seen. Raven flies closer and perches on the windowsill to watch. Inside, there is an old Salish man with a frown etched into his face. In the original legend, he has a daughter, but in this story, he is alone. The house is filled with boxes and baskets, but Raven is fixated on one particular box, the one in the man's hand. A powerful glow radiates from this box, giving light and warmth to the home. But as soon as Raven observed it, it was gone. The man had shut the box's lid and tucked away the light. Raven forms a plan to get that box. Raven is not an altruistic soul. She does not want to bring light to the world or to brighten the lives of others. Raven will become a collector of shiny things, of trinkets that sparkle and glow. This light will be the first in her collection, the shining star that starts it all. In this version, Raven shifts into a lost child. She exudes innocence and trust through her form and relies on the loneliness of the man and the human desire to care for another. She approaches his door and cries. The man is overjoyed. He dotes on her and gives her the best life he can in this world of darkness. She is allowed to play with most items in the home, but the box with the light is strictly forbidden. She cries and wails and squawks with the stubborn desire of a toddler. The man does as many fathers and grandfathers have always done. He caves. Raven marvels at the brightness of the light from the moment the box opens. Carefully, the man places the light in her lap and allows her to play. Raven grins up at him, and for a moment, the home is at peace. Then Raven begins to transform. Feathers sprout from her skin, and her grin morphs into a beak. Before the old lonely man can react, Raven grabs the light in her beak and flies up through the smoke hole of the home. She does not look back at the man whose secrets she has taken. The world instantly changes. Reflections begin to dance off the rivers. Trees and mountains throw their shadows as earth inhales its first taste of sunlight. The world wakes, and Eagle is awakened with it. Eagle is larger than Raven. He is more vicious and combative. Eagle's goal is to prove his power through force, and Raven undermines him in every place she can. He is constantly searching the darkness for her form and failing to catch her. Now his target is illuminated and clear. In her joy at success, Raven does not hear the beating of massive wings right away. For a moment, she does not feel the air grow dense with the fear and awe that Eagle invokes in the creatures of the world. It isn't until he gives an early, triumphant call that she swoops just out of his reach. In her sudden movement, the ball of light slips. When she grasps it, it splits in two. Half of the light falls to the ground and shatters. Half of what hits the ground bounces up and hangs in the sky, pockmarked and rough. The other half shatters into millions of tiny slivers that float up like dust and settle in the darkness. These become the moon and stars. Eagle continues to chase Raven. He is relentless in his desire to suppress her. They have flown for hours, and Raven begins to tire. She knows that as long as she carries this light, she will be a target. As long as she shines and he stares, she will not be free of him. She curves toward the sky and flies as high as she can, with Eagle trailing behind. Raven gently releases the light, letting it hang high in the vast silk of sky towards the east. She flies down with the light behind her. Eagle is blinded and loses her in the chase. Raven lands on the trees below, breathing easy now that she is away from Eagle for one more day. She watches the first rays of sunlight break through the branches. It wasn't what she intended, but the light is still, in a way, hers. The forgotten Salish man is angry. He cries at loss and betrayal. He covers his eyes and curses his weakness for sharing what was meant to be his alone. When his breath is finally even again, he moves his hand. Sunlight streams through the windows and the smoke hole of the home. The world outside is vivid and bright and welcoming. He knows in that moment that this was always meant to be, and his light will live on longer than ever. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much. We are delighted to have had you here reading from this remarkable book. Thank you to our conversationalists and presenting partners in Alabama and in Pennsylvania, and many of us in Massachusetts. We have all learned a great deal. Thank you to our guests from afar. And thanks also to the GBH Forum Network for all you do behind the scenes, Andrew and Frederique. And to the audience out there in Zoom land, so many places represented, thank you. We appreciate your interest in American history in all its diversity, including, again, the gaping holes. Thank you for being explorers with us through America's history. We wish you all a good night.